Good morning. It's lovely to be here with you all today. And what a privilege to be able to share more about our listening ear ministry at CCC. We're also going to look at our verse from the year, from Luke 24, where Jesus got alongside and listened to Cleopas and the other disciple on the road to Emmaus. After this, as Alistair said, some of the team are going to come up and share some quotes from those who have come to our listening ear service. We're also going to watch a video and have some time of prayer. You might have got a wee card when you came in the door. Please feel free to write that down. Any thoughts or questions that come up as you listen to the service today. When was the last time that you felt really listened to? And not only that, that you knew the person listening to you really cared about you? Around 15 years ago, I went through a really disorientating time in my life. I'd gone through a period of time where I'd had numerous losses and changes, one after the other. The most significant one was the loss of both my parents. My mother, just before I turned 30, my mother was diagnosed with cancer. And so I came back to Inverness to look after her. Shortly after that, my mother passed away. And then quite suddenly and under difficult circumstances, my father died just a couple of years after that. Being back in Inverness, I was away from my well-established church community in Edinburgh, my job that I loved, my colleagues that had grown to be friends. So I had gone through a lot of change, and also the minister that I'd been part of in the church in Edinburgh for 10 years also died quite suddenly of cancer. My best friend and my flatmate at that time, she also got married. In my current job, my new job in Inverness, I was helping set up a charity for people who had suffered from abuse and trauma, and I was hearing a lot of suffering each day. And the result was, after a couple of years, I was sad. I was grieving. I was quite disorientated and disappointed. And although I was a believer, at that time, I was struggling to see where God was in all of the suffering. My life was different than what I hoped it would be. And I was going through a period of doubt, and it was painful. And while I was in that state, I managed to pluck up the courage to go and to speak to someone. But it took me a number of years to be able to do that. And it was quite a big deal because I was used to trying to cope with it on my own and get on with it by myself. I went to talk to this person at one of the meetings. I was struggling to put my grief and my confusion into words. And I was trying to express my fears about my doubt and my confusion about suffering. And it's like that when we're suffering, isn't it? Sometimes it's hard to get the words. But after a time of listening, my gracious and patient listener became tearful. They said, "God loves you, Janet. God loves you." And there was something about that in that moment that made me know it was true. It was my listeners' care for me and their sincere heart that somehow communicated God's love in a way I hadn't experienced before. I knew God loved me even when I was in that state of doubt. And I knew that God had sent Jesus to die for me when I was at my worst. He hadn't left me. His heart was for me. He was a God who listened. And the hope that I had lost sight of at that time of my life gradually started to return. And so as we go back to the disciples on the road to Emmaus, and we see that they too were in this state of confusion and doubt and grief. And when Jesus died, as we looked at last week, they felt centuries of hope died with him, didn't they? And it was like a falling apart of all their hopes, both for themselves and for their nation. And maybe you're here today and you can identify with that in your life. Maybe it seems that everything you based your hopes on is falling apart, is falling away, has not yet happened. Maybe you've recently lost a loved one or someone close to you. And you'd hoped that things would turn out differently, and they haven't. And grief, doubt, and loss of hope can be disorientating and painful. And in grief, it is normal to go through different stages of loss, such as shock, a sense of disorientation, confusion, bewilderment. It's different for everyone, and there's no linear pattern. But in time, and it can take time, we can come to see that Jesus is not distant and remote from us, that he is the one who suffered for us, and he longs for us to see him walking beside us, listening to us, and showing us grace and truth, which bring hope and transformation. So before we look briefly at how Jesus listened to these disciples, I just want to notice a couple of other things from the passage. So what happens when we talk about all these things together? And it's amazing to notice when I was preparing this week, it was while the disciples were talking together about all these things, about their grief, about their sadness and disappointment, that Jesus himself draws near, while they were in the middle of this pain and confusion. And it made me think about Psalm 34, that says, he is near to the brokenhearted, and he saves those who are crushed in spirit. Jesus is close when we are sharing deeply with each other and when we're walking with others who are broken. Jesus, the one who is gentle and lowly in heart, is with us, is near us, and that's what makes a difference. Dane Ortland, in his book, Gentle and Lowly, says, gentle and lowly, this, according to his own testimony, is Christ's very heart. This is who he is, tender, open, welcoming, accommodating, understanding, willing. This is Christ's heart. It's who he is. And as the disciples walked and talked together about all those things, they weren't alone. And what about us? Do we have other people walking alongside us? Do we walk alongside others? And as we do this walking with each other through the ups and downs and the struggles of life, what is it that helps us most? And as I shared from my own story, what made the difference for me was the heart, the love, and the care of the person who took time to listen to me. Their care helped me see God's love in a way that I hadn't before. And the person did go on to share truth with me, but I was much more ready to receive it after I knew their love and their care for me. When I was training to be a counsellor a number of years ago now, a much more experienced counsellor said to me, I think this was in response to I don't think I'll be able to do this. I don't think I can help people. I don't think I can remember all the details of what they tell me. And this wise counsellor said, Janet, people will understand your struggle and your desire to help them and to understand. And that often helps me now because I don't always get it right. But if we desire to understand the struggle and to understand what another person goes through, they pick that up. They know our hearts. And it reminded me of that quote that we're probably all familiar with. You know, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Our love and our care are not perfect, but God's love is. God's love is patient and kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It's not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. And these past few weeks, as I've been thinking about this passage, I've been thinking a lot about kindness. And recently, again, someone reminded me of this other quote, be kind, because everyone is fighting a battle that you know nothing about. And isn't it true? You know, as I meet people and they share their battles and their struggles with me, I'm often humbled by how much they're carrying underneath the appearance of fine. I was talking to someone recently that I hadn't talked to for a while, and I said to them, how are you? And they said, fine. And they paused. And then, after a time of silence, filled up with tears and said, "No, I'm not actually. I'm really struggling and I feel like I'm falling apart." Another person recently told me as I met them in the car park with tears in their eyes, "All I see, Janet, in the mirror is the cracks." And we both teared up, and I said, "We all have them. We all have the cracks." And when I see this person, I don't see the cracks. I see their love and their compassion and their care for others. So, as a way of summarizing some of what we've said already, let's have a little think about briefly, what does good listening do and why is it important? So, as we've seen, listening communicates God's love and care. You know, in the passage, we see Jesus' heart of love for these disciples, don't we? And how he sought them out. He got alongside them. He fell into place with their walk. And he listened to them. And we don't know how long in the journey it was that he listened to them. But his grace was shown in how he loved them in their brokenness. We looked at last week, didn't we? How that they had, their expectations weren't completely right. And they were blind to him. But Jesus loved them and listened to them then, when they were still in that place. Listening enables the telling of our story, doesn't it? From the passage, we can see that the listening enabled the disciples to talk about their disappointment and their grief and their sadness. Jesus allowed them the balm of articulation and to unburden their hearts. And we all have a story to tell, don't we? And healing and change often starts with sharing our hearts honestly with someone we know cares about us and will listen. And listening opens up the way for sharing truth. Jesus was patient in listening to them. He had the answers. He was the answer. But he wanted them to discover it for themselves. Rather than jumping in and telling them who he was straight away, Jesus was both grace and truth, but grace came first. Listening is about ministry and service. You know, in the New Testament, we see in the New Testament, ministry is chiefly about service, isn't it? Of the kind demonstrated by Jesus when he washed the feet of the disciples. It's not about status or position, but about our availability to serve. Listening has to do with our attitudes in the first place, rather than our skills. It's about availability, compassion, and belief in people. It's about who we are, rather than about what we do. And listening is a gift that we can offer to each other. And being listened to is a gift. When we're listened to and heard, we know we matter, not only to God, not only to each other, but to God, whose availability is fleshed out in the listener. And listening is about hospitality. This was new for me, I thought, when I read that this week. It's about offering a space in which we feel welcomed, met, and safe, free to be ourselves, to be listened to and heard. We offer in the first place our personal space rather than our words, yet a space where we're fully present and available to the one needing our listening. It's chiefly about being present to the other person and open to God on his or her behalf. This quote from a lady called Anne Long really spoke to me this week. This willingness to put aside our own concerns and listen is costly, yet it can feel to the person needing a listening ear like stepping from a cold, dark street into a warm, welcoming home. So how do we do this listening in practice at CCC? I want to tell you just briefly a little bit about our listening ear service before we hear from our volunteers and then watch a video. So, as Alistair said earlier, listening is part of all our ministries at the church here and is an important element in all our relationships. And we're thankful for all the ways that people are listened to, and I'm certainly thankful for all the people who listen to me. And listening ear is another way that we offer this listening to people in our community. Our listening ear service offers a regular, intentional listening space for those in the church or the community who really need a space to be listened to. We've got a wonderful team, and I'm so thankful for the way that they serve, of 7 trained volunteers and some helpers who help us at Listening Ear Hilton as well, who are all supported by us here at CCC. Sometimes people come weekly to Listening Ear for an hour. Other times it's less frequent. But it's a safe place where people can come knowing that they can talk about anything that's on their hearts. Our Listening Ear service is confidential, non-judgmental, and open to everyone, whether they share our faith or attend our church or not. And what a privilege it is to be able to offer our church as a place of help and hope for those who are often on waiting lists for support, who are feeling alone, struggling with issues on their own. And when people are vulnerable or hurting, it takes a lot, doesn't it, to ask for help and to come forward. So I'm going to stop talking now, and I'm going to invite our wonderful team to come up and share some quotes from those who have used our Listening Ear service.